This story shows how addiction can slowly destroy a person and everyone around them. If you want more real stories like this, like and subscribe. This one comes from Erowid, a site that collects real drug experience reports. Dying to get high. I know this is a long story, but please read it. Let it soak into every fiber of your being. I met Scotty in 1986 at a bar where my roommate worked. He would always come in with his friend Steve, and they would sit around and BS while drinking Crown Royal shots. They were known as the Crown Royal Boys. Anyhow, they were both very nice, polite, likable kinds of guys. Scotty would sometimes come in by himself, and he always looked so down. Later, I found out it was because he was very lonely. One time, he asked me out to dinner with no strings attached, as he put it, but I was in a relationship at the time and had to decline his kind offer. Later, one day in September of 1987, I was at the bar and Scotty was there too. I wasn't very happy in my relationship because of abuse, and I ended up going over to Scotty's house to drink and do crank. We partied and talked and drank. We talked about all kinds of things, including my unhappy relationship. He offered me a place to stay if I needed one, and again, no strings attached. We talked and drank some more. Then he finally told me that he had to lie down and try to get some rest because he had to go to work in a few hours. He welcomed me to stay and sleep on the couch or in his bed, again with no strings attached. I decided I would stay the night there. He offered me one of his t-shirts to sleep in, and I began undressing in front of him. He hid his face and pointed toward the bathroom and said, "You can go in there and change." I chuckled to myself and thought, what a country bumpkin, but his innocent-like ways were cute. Anyhow, I ended up lying down in his bed, and a couple of months later, I realized I was pregnant with his baby. Scotty and I began our life together. He was so happy to have me there with him. My daughter, who was 10, was also there with us for a bit, and he was just great with her. He seemed like such a great guy, and he really was, but drugs had a hold of him, and me too at the time. I carried our daughter to term and partied in the manner of beer and a couple of match heads of coke in the first 3 months of pregnancy. Then I quit and stayed clean and sober during the rest of my pregnancy. Of course, Scotty partied like usual. I gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl and did the party thing all over again after she was born. With a new baby, I couldn't run free like I used to, and I got left at home while Scotty would go to the bar and do his thing. Sometimes Scotty and I would go out to the bars and party together, and later down the road, I would get pregnant again and quit. He would continue throughout my pregnancy. I would lie awake worrying about where he was and if he was okay. Was he dead or alive? I called the bars, his friends, the hospital, jail, all those things, hunting him down, and eventually he would wander in drunk sometime in the morning. I cried, yelled, screamed, tried to talk to him, reason with him, guilt trip him. You name it, I did it, trying to make him clean up his act. He would feel bad and say he was going to clean up, but hey, we all know the scene. I got pregnant a second time and found out that I was having a boy and could hardly wait to tell Scotty. I rushed home to tell him, and on the way home, I saw his truck sitting out in front of a friend's house, friend and dealer. I stopped and went in to find him there, pawning one of his carpenter saws for a quarter bag of crank. I was mad and left. He came home shortly afterward and hung his head in shame, as usual, with all the "I'm sorry I've let you down again" speeches. Anyways, I gave birth to our son. On the day I was being discharged from the hospital, after I had already checked out, I waited for 2 hours for Scotty to come and pick up me and his new baby. When he did arrive, he was so amped up it was embarrassing. He was sweating and talking so fast. I was mad and hurt and thought, how could he be late picking me and his son up from the hospital? I yelled at him all the way home. He gave me some story about being out riding his motorcycle with some other guy, and the guy got pulled over, and of course, good old Scotty had to ride off a bit and pull in somewhere to keep an eye out for his buddy. The guy went to jail, and Scotty went up to some chick at the gas station who had a truck and asked her to help him get his friend's bike. Oddly enough, they knew each other from the bar, and so she helped him. I always wondered how true that story was, especially later on when we were at the bar together and I saw him in a corner arguing with her about something. It looked like a lover's quarrel to me. Anyhow, the night we got home with our son, Scotty took off to the bar because he was mad that I bitched him out. I just sat home and cried. Finally, I called the bar and was told he wasn't there, but I told the bartender that if she saw him, to please tell him I was sorry and that I loved him and wanted him to come home. That was what our relationship was like. He would drink and use, and I would yell and scream and accuse him of being on dope. He would lie. I would find his bag and bust him. He would get pissed and leave or feel guilty and apologize, like a vicious cycle. This is the dance we did. He would leave. I would hunt him down via phone or with my car. We would fight, make love, make up, and do it all over again. I ended up going out and buying my own quarter bag because I thought, screw it. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. But really, all I wanted was for Scotty to accept me, and if that meant I had to use for him to like me again, then I would use, and I did. We continued to fight, and he continued to run. I chased, and sometimes I did my own running, and he chased. That was fun for me, to have him come after me for a change. We ended up moving out of our old neighborhood to a whole new city, hoping that we could get away from the drugs. Scotty had lost jobs and was taking whatever he could get. We hoped our move would bring us a new future, and it kind of did for about a month. Scotty stayed home with me, and we were both clean. We laughed and had fun. He was really great to be around. I got pregnant again. One day, Scotty left to look for work. I puttered around the house doing the Susie homemaker thing. It got later and later in the day with no sign of Scotty. I started worrying about him, wondering if he'd been in an accident, calling the hospitals and jails, calling some of the local bars. Then that dread set in. The thoughts of him using again filled my mind, but I wouldn't let them take root. There is just no way he would do that, I thought to myself. Hours later, he wandered in with some story about running out of gas, and some guy that was right on helping him out. Of course, the guy just happened to be a crank dealer and blah blah, blah blah blah. But I didn't get any dope, and I'm not gonna use, I promise, he said. Day after day, night after night, Scotty's addiction took him further and further away again. I wasn't sure I wanted to have this baby and do this again, but I just couldn't go through an abortion, so there it was. I was pregnant again for the third time with Scotty's baby. Scotty began hanging out at his new friend's house a lot, and he had become mean in his actions toward me. One day, he was outside being a jerk, and I was going to our door just so I didn't have to listen to his mouth spewing obscenities toward me. I shut the screen door and was about to begin to close the glass door when, out of nowhere, Scotty thrust a knife through the screen, just barely stopping before making contact with my pregnant belly. I continued shutting the door, and he went around front and broke through the door, tearing it off the hinges and everything. We constantly fought, and I constantly felt like if only I was a better person, or if only I didn't do this or did do that, then maybe he would love me and stop using. Once again, we decided to move. I must say, I was relieved to leave that place. I was all for moving. We were moving to the San Fernando Valley in LA County, and were going to stay with some friends for a bit until we got on our feet. Scotty was mellow there, but still did his thing. We got our own place, and things remained the same for me, wondering where he was, what he was doing. He drank and did his dope, but seemed less out of control than before. I had a friend that lived in Oregon, and I would talk to her on a regular basis. We decided to move to Oregon and try to start a new life. My mom sent me some money to help us move. Things were fun on the way there, until our car burned to the ground. My friend had to come and get us. We stayed at her place, and things were okay, but I was not happy there either. Scotty drank, but I didn't notice much crank use. Of course, I was taking care of 3 babies, all in diapers, so I was focused on them. We ended up moving back to California a month later and staying at his brother's wife's house. His brother was in jail for what else? Drugs. Anyway, we stayed there, found a place to move to, and just like before, it all started over again. This time, though, I went out drinking with Scotty, and when we came home, I was so drunk, I hugged the toilet all night. The next day, I was thinking about things and realized that I didn't remember if I paid our babysitter or not. As a matter of fact, I didn't even remember coming home. I thought to myself, what if I had dropped my baby? Would I have remembered to call 911? And that's when I knew things had to change, at least where I was concerned. Scotty remained true to his addictions, and I was miserable. He would drink and come home drunk, yelling and screaming at me, calling me all kinds of names. I hated it. I thought to myself, if he calls me a F-can-B one more time, I'm going to scream. I was so sick of my life, and all the misery Scotty's drinking and drug use were causing. I thought, I am so unhappy, and have been unhappy for as long as I can remember. I thought, I am going to just kill myself. Yeah, that's it. I'll kill myself. I've tried drugs. I've tried alcohol. I've tried men. I've tried everything, and nothing works. Now there is nothing left but death. Then something said, have you tried God yet? Until you've tried God, you haven't tried everything. I prayed right then and there. I said, God, I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want to use drugs anymore. I don't even want to smoke anymore. 3 days later, it occurred to me that I hadn't done any of my old habits, and I realized that not only had I not practiced any old habits, but I didn't even have the desire to. That was the beginning of the end of my drug days for the next 4 years, and at that moment I thought to myself, there must be something to this God thing. I could never quit on my own before, but when I prayed, it worked for me. It was a true miracle. I began going to church. I wanted Scotty to come, but he preferred the bars and his dope. I took the kids and attended church. He hung out with his buddies and did drugs. I told him that we needed to live in separate places, and that I wanted him to move. He wasn't happy with me, but he pretended like he would honor what I said and left to go work on his van so that when he moved out, he could leave me the car. Well, that day, I got a phone call from Scotty's friend. Scotty had propped his van up on one side, resting it on a couch, and the other side was jacked up. It was a windy day, and the wind blew. The propped-up side dropped on Scotty while he was under the van, and he was rushed to the hospital. Some friends from church came over and took my kids so that I could leave to be with Scotty. I got to the hospital, and the doctors told me that they doubted that he would live. And if he lived, they said he would have brain damage. I went to see him, and he was hooked up to tubes and monitors and all sorts of things. He was in a coma, and later the nurses told me that they didn't think he would make it through the night. Scotty had no broken bones, but had punctured a lung. The big worry was that he had been under the van for about 4 minutes with little to no oxygen. Well, time went by, and Scotty came out of the coma but couldn't move his right arm. As time went on, he healed completely and was back to his old self before you knew it. I thought for sure he would have this new outlook on life since his life had been spared, but no, he didn't even remember the accident. I still had him move out, and he went to stay with his brother, who had gotten out of prison again. I continued on in church, and he continued to worship his god, meth and alcohol. One day he came to me and said he wanted to be clean and sober and start going to church. We were married a few days later. I was so happy that he was clean, and he did really good for a while, but he fell here and there. Before our first anniversary, he was already back in his dope world. I'd come home from church, and there would be all these people out front, all drug users, of course. While Scotty was clean and going to church, we had some really nice times. He could be so wonderful when he was clean. I loved him dearly. I kept thinking he would come to his senses and stop doing dope again, but no such luck. It got worse. I'd find evidence of his drug use and confront him, only to have him lie about it. Our first anniversary rolled around, and he was so proud to take me to Pismo Beach and rent me a Lexus. It was great, except he just wasn't present. He tried to be, but he just couldn't fake it. I could tell he really wanted to make me happy and be clean, but if he did that, he wouldn't be happy. So from that point on, Scotty lived the way he wanted to. I left Scotty on November 14th, 1994. I hoped it would be a wake-up call for him, like a big smack in the head, but it wasn't. He spiraled down even further. I would go see him from time to time, or have him over for dinner. He usually didn't eat. I was having a hard time letting go of him completely. He would come to me every now and then and tell me he needed help, and I would try to help him. He went in and out of drug rehab and Christian men's homes, but always returned to drugs. I tried to help him as much as I could by taking him to meetings and being supportive, but I got burnt out. The final straw for me was when he stayed with me under the condition that he would go to the VA for outpatient rehab. I would take him to meetings and things. He went and seemed like he was doing okay until one day I was in financial need and was going to the swap meet to sell some things to pay a bill. He said he had some things he needed to sell too, so he came along with me. I made a little money, he made a nice amount. That evening, he had a meeting. I drove him there, dropped him off, and didn't see him for a couple of days. He had taken his money and spent it on dope. That was it. I was done. Don't get me wrong, I let him come visit his kids and me, but I kept my distance. He was staying with some friends, and I would get phone calls from people saying that he had ripped them off, and that they had found needles around the place he was staying. I didn't believe them, because I hadn't seen that side of Scotty. I knew that in his past, he had used needles, but I didn't think he did when he was with me. There were a time or two that he came to visit and fell asleep on my couch, and I thought that there might have been needle marks on him, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to ask, to have him lie about it. And if the truth be known, I really didn't want to know. I do know that I watched a man go from a hard-working man to a man who couldn't hold a job, and I watched a man who had a place to live begin to live under overpasses and down by lakes. One day Scotty came to me and told me that he really wanted help, and a friend of mine directed him to a place called the Lord's House. Scotty went and stayed there for a while. He got a job at the church and did quite well for a fairly good amount of time. He would come and visit for the holidays. He really was trying, but the hope he now held for a relationship with me was gone. I had lost all trust. Scotty moved out of the Lord's House but stayed in the same California city. I ended up moving to Maryland in 1998. Scotty called me up and said he wanted to come see his kids. I told him okay, but that he would have to stay in a motel because he couldn't stay with me. When he showed up, he had $5 to his name. I let him stay at my place for 2 nights, and then I took him to a place to talk to someone about rehab. I gave him $10 and dropped him off. On the way to this place, he was trying to tell me how much he had changed. Changed? I yelled. You haven't changed. Here I sit in this van, driving you to another place so that you can go into rehab. You haven't changed at all, Scott. What has changed is me, and this is the last time that I am going to do this with you. I am not the same woman I was in California, and you are not going to put me through this ever again, so you better get it right this time. Scott got into rehab but took off a few weeks later and went back to California. We would talk to him from time to time via telephone. He would always try to tell me he was doing good, but I knew he was lying. I moved back to Oregon in June of 2001, and I hunted Scott down via telephone so that he would at least know where his kids were. At that time, Scott was traveling around with some carnival, but he did say that he would like for me to look up jobs for him and help him find a Salvation Army out there to stay at, but I didn't. I honestly didn't want him to move there unless he could come out with enough money to find a place to live and really look for work on his own. I would get letters from Scott apologizing to me and the kids. He would always let me know he wished we could get back together, and I know Scotty loved me as best as he knew how, but I couldn't put myself or our kids through his drug addiction. He later ended up in coastal California and lived there the past 3 years. We talked a few times, and he sent the kids some money for their birthdays and Christmas. I don't know what he did for work there, but I do know that he used the homeless shelter as his address. He would write the kids, and our oldest daughter, who was going to school out in California, would go and visit him. I saw his effort there. He told me he wanted to see our other kids and get to know them, but I was really scared to let him. I was afraid he would hurt them with his drug use. They had been hurt enough. I had always been honest with them about his drug use and never tried to cover it up. I figured it was better for them to know that their dad was a drug addict, and that is what kept him from being around, rather than risk them thinking he didn't love them. I talked to Scotty about a year ago. I was distant. I had to be. I wasn't about to let him in ever again. Our older daughter told me that he had gone to see her in June of 2004, and he kept leaving and going to the bar. He was hanging out with old friends who used. A mutual friend said that he was sweating and acting like a wild man, drinking one beer after another. He was with his brother, who had just gotten out of prison yet again, for drugs. My daughter was upset with her dad because he was supposed to be helping her move to Colorado. He was to drive the U-Haul, but she didn't feel safe with him acting the way he was. A friend confronted him on his behavior, and he did the typical thing. He was insulted. He said he resented being accused of being on drugs. He told them that they could figure out how to get to Colorado themselves, and left. In November of 2004, I had tried to contact Scotty regarding the kids, but he did not answer his cell phone. I called and left message after message with nothing in return. That was very odd for Scott because one thing he had been trying to do was call back if it was one of the kids or about one of them. On February 9th, 2005, I got a phone call from our oldest daughter, who lives in Colorado. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello." She said, "Mom." I said, "Yes." She said, "Dad died." I will never forget those words. Scotty died on October 16th, 2004, due to complications from drug use. He had been shooting up, and as a result, he got a bacterial infection, cellulitis, which he probably thought was just an abscess. He more than likely tried to treat it himself, and when he realized that he couldn't, and it was getting worse, he then went to the hospital, but he had waited too long because it had turned into staph and necrotizing fasciitis. He lived for 7 days until his body went into septic shock, and he had cardiac arrest and died. I just found this out on February 9th, 2005. Scotty had listed himself as single, therefore they didn't try to find his wife or tell his kids. He died being labeled a transient with no kin instead of celebrating his 48th birthday. Scotty was being cremated. I spoke with the coroner and sheriff, and they told me that a man named John took Scotty to the hospital. And after Scotty passed away, John tried to say he was Scotty's brother and claim his personal belongings. When asked for ID, John then said, "Well, I was like a brother." What a vulture. The very people who paraded around as his friends were the first to try and rip him off. I was angered by this to no end. You know, when we use, we think, what's the big deal? I'm not hurting anyone. That is not the truth, because people are being hurt by your drug use. Everyone who loves you is being hurt by it. Just ask Scotty's kids. They've suffered the ultimate pain. Their dad is dead because of his choice to use. If you are reading this and you are using drugs, it doesn't matter what kind of drugs or how you use them. Please get help. There is hope for you. If you want more real, raw stories like this, drop a comment, like, and subscribe. Then check out the video on your screen right now.